next thing. So we're going to finish off Ezra today. I really wanted to get to the end of the book, because I think the end of the book is the more controversial sort of part of it, the more that's a little bit more challenging, for us. And so we have a few chapters to get there. We'll skim through a little bit of it until we get to the end. As you'll see, the first part today, it's going to be a lot of names, so I'll spare you some of that torture. I can't spare you from all of it, but at least some of it as we go through. Okay.
No, 7.
Okay, so we're at chapter 7 here, book of Ezra. We're going to skip this paragraph. I'll just sort of summarize it quickly. Where King Artaxerxes of Persia, these are the events. Then you have Ezra, right? So now we're moving to Ezra again, son of all of these people. And the most important part of this paragraph is that Ezra comes up from Babylon, right? He was one of the exiles, in Babylon at that time. A scribe who was expert in the teaching of Moses, which the eternal God of Israel had given, and whose request the king had granted in its entirety, thanks to the benevolence of the eternal towards him. So here basically being Ezra's the man, right? Ezra is a scholar. Ezra has the knowledge, right? The teaching of God. And he knows what he's doing. So he has that power. So in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah, right? We're going to talk about where does authority come from? Where does power come from? And this is something that is systemic in a way in the Israelite monarchy during the time when there was a monarchy, right? Where you had the king, right? Saul, Solomon, David, the rest of them. But you also had prophets, right? And so you had the divine authority that was the prophets, right? They were the ones who were communicating with God. And you had the political entity, that's the king. And then there was a debate on who was in charge, right? And sometimes that muddied the waters a bit because the king wants to be a king of everybody. He wants to be the rule maker, and the one who makes the decisions. And you have the prophet going, king, you know what? God says no. Or God wants you to do X, Y, and Z. So there's a struggle. In a different way, you have it here. It's not a struggle, it's a partnership, where you have Ezra, who almost serves as that function, as the prophetic voice. He is the scribe, he is the teacher, he is the knowledgeable one. And Nehemiah is going to be more of the politician. He's going to be the one who is going to be dealing with that side of governmental affairs a little bit differently. And so now that he's here, and he has some crew, right? He has Israelites and priests and Levites. He has all the people that are with him now. So we're having that restoration of the worship, restoration of the cult, so to speak, of worship, where we're going to have a temple again. I mean, we have all the pieces in place. We have the teachers, we have the singers, we have the priests, we have the servants. All these people now are coming back from Babylon to Jerusalem to build something new. And so we're going to start off over here. Sharon, you want to pick up on the first day?
Excuse me. On the first day of the first month, the journey up from Babylon was started, and on the first day of the 5th month, he arrived in Jerusalem, thanks to the benevolent care of his God for him. For Ezra had dedicated himself to study the teaching of the Eternal, so as to observe it and to teach laws and rules to Israel.
Very nice. Okay. And so this is sort of the beginning of the journey here, right? And Ezra is going to be the one helping to teach. Ezra is going to be the proto-rabbi, so to speak. He's going to be the teacher. He's going to be the one teaching the Torah. And he, as I mentioned, he's imbued with power, not only because of his knowledge of God, but because he has a relationship with the king, right? The king is giving him, because that's the reality when you're not independent, right? You have to answer to somebody. Persia is the ruling power, but he and Ezra have made some kind of arrangement, some kind of deal. Sharon, will you give me one more paragraph here?
The following is the text of the letter which King Artaxerxes gave
Artaxerxes.
Is that it?
Artaxerxes, yeah.
Gave Ezra, the priest scribe, a scholar in matters concerning the commandments of the eternal and God's laws to Israel.
Right, next. Brahms, you want to pick up here?
Artaxerxes, King of Kings, listen correctly, to Ezra the priest, scholar in the law of God of heaven, and so forth. And now I hereby issue an order that anyone in my kingdom who is of the people of Israel and its priests and Levites who feel compelled to go to Jerusalem may go with you. For you are commissioned by the king and his 7 advisors to regulate Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your care, and to bring free will offering of silver and gold, which the king and his advisors made to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, and whatever silver and gold that you find throughout the province of Babylon, together with the free will offerings that the people and the priests will give for the house of their God, which is in Jerusalem.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, so this is basically the letter that we talked about last week. The letter that is written, and there was one written before this, but basically giving the Israelites the permission to go home and to rebuild. And so, and they get a little cash to go with this. Melissa, you want to pick up there?
He says you get a little cash to go.
You shall therefore with dispatch acquire with this money bulls, rams, and lambs, with their meal offerings and libations, and offer them on the altar of the house of your God in Jerusalem. And whatever you wish to do with the leftover silver and gold, you and your kinsmen may do in accord with the will of your God. The vessels for the service of the house of your God that are given to you, deliver to God in Jerusalem, and any other needs of the house of your God that it falls to you to supply, do so from the royal treasury.
Okay. So again, a little bit of that money, right, flowing in. Do whatever you want with it. Buy some pretty stuff for the temple. We need it. And then again, the king's going to continue. We can keep going.
I, King Artaxerxes, for my part, hereby issue an order to all the treasurers in the province of beyond the river that whatever request Ezra the priest, scholar in the law of the God of heaven, makes of you is to be fulfilled with dispatch up to the sum of 100 talents of silver, 100 core of wheat, 100 bath of wine, 100 bath of oil, and salt without limit. Whatever is by order of the God of heaven must be carried out diligently for the house of the God of heaven, else wrath will come upon the king and his sons.
Okay, so God's putting it down, right? So Artaxerxes is fulfilling God's command, basically, and saying this is what has to be done. And he knows if it doesn't happen, God's going to smack him around a little bit. God's going to come down and cause some problems for the Persians if this isn't so. And so 100%. Okay. And so here we got a little more. I mean, sometimes we can fast forward maybe a little bit through. That it's not permissible to tax. These Levites, any of these servants. They get to work tax free, so to speak. A good thing, a little parsonage, perhaps. And you, Ezra, sort of like Moses, gets to appoint these magistrates and judges. Right, gets to sort of create his own system. So even though they have to obey and they have to be deferential to a foreign leader, they have some areas, maybe a little more of independence, right? Where they're going to be able to have some judges for themselves, magistrates, who are going to help impart the law, to teach those who do not know. Let anyone who does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king be punished by death, corporal punishment, confiscation of possessions, or imprisonment. So Ezra's getting a pretty wide berth here. right, in terms of setting up the system that he wants to set up. Okay, and then blessed is the God of our fathers, who, etc. So it's like a little prayer at the end of it. So what it shows here is, again, the inclination, the positivity that Persia has towards the Israelites. So it's recorded that the Persian kingdom, which is historically accurate, were more benevolent than the Babylonians before them, and the Greeks who would come after, that wanted to impose a much harsher rule upon the Israelites. Here they're getting a little bit of freedom back. They're not independent, they're still a vassal state, but they have permission to have a little bit more of self-governance. And the creation, again, the restoration of their religious community, which they need, obviously. Okay. More names everywhere. The chiefs of the clans. Fast forward. All these names, the sons of this one, the sons of that one, 60 males here, different males there. We're going to keep going off this. This is a little bit much. Here we go. Sorry, I got fast forwarded too far. Okay. So this is now the creation of the administration. Ezra's not going to speak, which is rare in this book, in first person. And so he's going to create his team. All these different players are coming in. And now he's going to begin to set down, well, what's this going to look like in the future? What do we want this to be? Debbie. You want to pick up over here? I proclaim the fast. This is Ezra.
I proclaimed a fast there by the Ahava River to afflict ourselves before our God, to beseech him for a smooth journey for us and for our children and for all our possessions. For I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us against any enemy on the way, since we had told the king, the benevolent care of our God is for all who seek God, while God's fierce anger is against all who forsake God. So we fasted and we besought our God for this, and God responded to our plea.
Very nice. Okay, it's a little bit of a prayer, right? A prayer for protection. Because right now there's not a lot of protection, right? That's there. They're sort of on their own, right? They are trying to make their way, and they're trying to, make sure that they're going to be safe, right? In their attempts to get back, and basically praying to God to let's make sure that we get there safe, because they don't have, in the same way, the same resources. They don't have a military to defend them. Okay, Debbie, give me one more.
Then I selected 12 of the chiefs of the priests, namely Sherebiah and Hashabiah, with 10 of their brothers, and I weighed out to them the silver, the gold, and the vessels, the contribution to the house of our God, which the king, his counselors and officers, and all Israel who were present had made.
Yeah,
I entrusted to their safekeeping the weight of 650 talents of silver, 100 silver vessels, and of 1 talent each, 100 talents of gold, also 20 gold bowls worth 1,000 derricks, and 2 vessels of good shining bronze as precious as gold.
Excellent. So again, keep the money. Keep the money straight. Sandy, you want to pick up here?
Sure. I said to them, you are consecrated to the eternal, and the vessels are consecrated, and the silver and gold are a free will offering to the eternal God of your fathers. Guard them diligently until such time as you weigh them out in the presence of the officers of the priests and the Levites and the officers of the clans of Israel in Jerusalem, in the chambers of the house of the eternal. So the priests and the Levites received the cargo of silver and gold and vessels by weight, to bring them to Jerusalem, to the house of our God.
Excellent. Okay, so here is the, again, consecrating all of the objects, right? Consecrating the people themselves. First, the Levites have to be consecrated. They have to be sanctified to do the holy work. and then all different gold and silver are going to be used for that purpose, because ritual objects, right? They have a meaning, they have a value. They can't just be, you can't just, drink apple juice right out of the sacred vessels. Like, these are sanctified things that need to be used properly, and you have to have the knowledge. You have to know how they're supposed to be used, because a lot of this knowledge has been lost, for many people, because there was no temple, right? There was no temple, so you need to use the vessels. So you have to almost be taught again how to use all this stuff that fell into disrepair. I'm trying to think of a modern example, but it's like if I had to give Ari, my eldest, a rotary phone, like, he'd have no idea what to do with it, because it has fallen into disuse and disrepair. So he's not going to be there going like, what is this? That's not a phone to him. He doesn't know what it is, and wouldn't know how to use it. He'd have to be taught. I wouldn't know how to use it, because I have a memory of a rotary phone, right? But there are just things that, if you're not using them, if they're almost a relic of the past. And Ezra's trying to make sure that temple service does not become like a relic of the past, because temple service to him, avodah, the sacrifices, the worship, these are all really important. They haven't been doing it for 50 years. It's all dusty, it's all sort of, it's in disrepair. And so Ezra's job is to shine it up again. One could even maybe see a little bit of a parallel to this past year in a way. Just, some things are a little dusty, haven't been used in the past year. Like, our own worship has been very different. It's been modified. So the Israelites had to modify their worship when they were in Babylon, right? They had to create new ways of understanding Judaism. They had to build, which they did in Babylon, proto-synagogues, right? Now those have to be put aside in a way, because now we're going back, those who are going back to Israel, right, to do temple service again. You can't make sacrifices in Babylon. You can't offer up the rams and the bulls, in Persia. That's not where that's done. It has to be done in one place, and that is Jerusalem, where it hasn't been done, again, as I said, in 50 years or so. And so now this is relearned knowledge. The ones who were doing it, 50 years ago, that generation is probably all gone. And so you have these like stories, these ideas of how it was supposed to be done. And Ezra is the keeper. Ezra is the one who knows the stories. He knows the methods. He knows how to create worship and religious life again. It's entrusted in him to do it. And now he is trying to build again his squad, build his team of people that are going to help him now recreate worship. Okay, Sandy, you want to give me one more?
Sure. We set out for Jerusalem from the Ahava River on the 12th of the first month. We enjoyed the care of our God, who saved us from enemy ambush on the journey. We arrived in Jerusalem and stayed there 3 days. On the fourth day, the silver, gold, and vessels were weighed out in the house of our God into the keeping of Meremoth, son of Uriah the priest, with whom was Eleazar, son of Phinehas, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, and Noadiah, son of Binwai. The Levites were with them. Everything accorded as to a number and weight, the entire cargo being recorded at that time.
Yeah. Oh, so now they're schlepping, and they're there. And now they are bringing the vessels back. They have the priests there. They're going to be doing this stuff. And now, Mazel Tov, we made it. And now we can worship because all the vessels are back. And we can at least start. We can start the process. Carolyn, you want to read it a little bit here?
Sure.
They're returning.
Exiles who arrived from captivity made burnt offerings to the God of Israel. 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, and 12 he-goats as a purification offering. All this a burnt offering to the Eternal. They handed the royal orders to the king's satraps and the governors of the province of beyond the river, who gave support to the people and the house of God.
Okay, so now they're beginning I think those burnt offerings, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, all this good stuff. Now they're back to making these burnt offerings. And yay, they're all excited. And now that it's over, now the fun begins. Now we've sort of gotten to what we need to get to, right? And now is when we have the drama, the struggle of this whole piece, right? So we have to take a step back. For Ezra, again, the most important thing is the restoration of the sacrificial cult, the restoration of worship in Jerusalem, in the house of God, doing all the right things again that God has commanded. 50 years is a long time to be gone from something, right? And now we're excited and we're back and we're just feeling really good about ourselves. We just offered some burnt offerings. It smells so good. It smells like a nice barbecue going on at the temple. Reach nikoach, that sweet smell, that sweet aroma rises to the heavens. Delicious. And now, okay, that feels really good for the Israelites. That feels great. We're getting back to normal. But we got a problem, okay? We have an issue here, which is going to throw a little bit of a wrench at this.
Oh boy.
And so, Carolyn, you will give me one more paragraph here.
Okay, when I heard this, I rent my garment and robe.
Over here. Did we do this one yet? When this was over?
Oh, when this was over, the officers approached me saying, the people of Israel and the priests and Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the land, whose abhorrent practices are like those of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. Woo! They have taken their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed has become intermingled with the peoples of the land, and it is the officers and prefects who have taken the lead in this trespass.
Okay.
Wow.
So what's the problem?
Incest?
They're going after strange
Interfaith?
Interfaith marriage. Okay, interfaith marriage is now the hot button here because these people of Israel, not only the people, but the priests and the Levites, all these people are marrying all these darn Canaanites and Hittites and Perizzites and every other ite that you have here, right? And taking them for their daughters as wives. And so the holy seed, right? That pure Israelite goodness is now being diluted. And we're intermingled with the people of this land. And that is, in Ezra's mind, a big old problem, right? You know, because if we think back to the story of Solomon, for example, just as that's not going to be our point of reference, but the story of Solomon is that Solomon is a king of Israel, right? And he gets married. He has some marital troubles early on in his life, certainly as well. But Solomon eventually winds up marrying like 1,000 women. You know, like whatever it is, he has this tremendous number of wives and concubines that are all from other lands for the most part. And those foreign wives, according to the biblical tradition, bring Solomon away from God's teachings. Because, you know, not to be too glib, but, you know, happy wife, happy life, you know, as they say, right? So if your wife wants you to worship Baal once in a while, maybe you worship a little bit of Baal on the weekends. You know, maybe you worship the Moabite god a little bit much, you know, whatever it might be. But the Israelite men in this example here, you know, are sort of being seduced into foreign practice. And that is diluting the teachings. And what happens when you don't follow God's laws in Ezra's mind?
He's gonna be angry.
God gets angry. It's a little, you know, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be a good day. They just returned from exile, and they were exiled to Babylon because they weren't doing what? They weren't following God's
God.
teachings,
God's rule.
and so Ezra's getting PTSD right away here because he's thinking, oh my God, I just got back. My feet, I haven't even unpacked my bags yet, right? I haven't even set up my room, so to speak. And the world is coming to an end again, maybe because of the fact that we are not obeying God's law. We're having this intermixing between Israelites and all these other people. And so, okay, when I heard this, let's see, when I heard this, Renee Ramey, you want to read a little bit?
Sure. When I heard this, I rent my garment and robe. I tore hair out of my head and beard, and I sat desolate. Around me gathered all who were concerned over the words of the God of Israel because of the returning exiles' trespass, while I sat desolate until the evening offering. At the time of the evening offering, I ended my self-affliction. Still in my torn garment and robe, I got down on my knees and spread out my hands to the eternal my God and said, "Oh my God, I am too ashamed and mortified to lift my face to you. Oh my God, for our iniquities are overwhelming and our guilt has grown high as heaven."
Okay, so Ezra's not amused, right? Ezra's ripping at his clothing. Ezra's, very upset, and he's praying and he's lamenting at this point, and just saying that to God that he's so embarrassed by what's happening. And so Ezra is forlorn, to put it nicely. He is not a happy guy at this point in time. Okay.
It's almost like he's sitting Shiva.
Almost like he's sitting Shiva.
It's like he tore his garment and yeah.
Okay, Renee, you want to give me one more of these little long runs here?
Yes. From the time of our fathers to this very day, we have been deep in guilt. Because of our iniquities, we, our kings and our priests, have been handed over to foreign kings, to the sword, to captivity, to pillage, and to humiliation, as is now the case. But now, for a short while, there has been a reprieve from the eternal God, our God, who has granted us a surviving remnant and given us a stake in God's holy place. Our God has restored the luster to our eyes and furnished us with a little sustenance in our bondage. For bondsmen we are, though even in our bondage, God has not forsaken us, but has disposed the king of Persia favorably toward us, to furnish us with sustenance and to raise again the house of our God, repairing its ruins and giving us a hold in Judah and Jerusalem.
Okay, so again, giving us a little bit of the history lesson, right, that we know already because we've read prophets before, but this idea, Mipnei chatotenu, galinu me'artzenu, because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. That is a common trope that we have in the Bible, and certainly then in rabbinic literature. The idea that because of things that we have done wrong, because of our iniquities, we were decimated. We were exiled, we were killed, we were humiliated. And now, finally, things are getting a little bit better. We have a little bit of a reprieve, right? And God is letting us come back to our holy land. And even though we had these tough years, 50 years, again, not a short time, we had 50 years when we were basically beaten down and broken in Babylon. And now, God, you've helped us out. Because again, in Ezra's mind, remember, God is controlling all of this. God is controlling history, like we had with Daniel, right? God is involved in history. So God has warmed Pharaoh's heart, so to speak. God has warmed the heart. God has softened up the king of Persia, and now is allowing us to go back home. Hooray, hooray, to Judah and Jerusalem. But now we're finding a way to screw it up. Leah, you want to pick up here?
Sure. Now,
what can I say?
Yeah. Now, what can we say in the face of this? Oh, our God, for we have forsaken your commandments. which you gave us through your servants, the prophets, when you said, the land that you are about to possess is a land unclean through the uncleanliness of the peoples of the land, through their abhorrent practices with which they, in their impurity, have filled it from one end to the other.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so again, not off to a good start. Unclean everywhere. Tameh, through all these unclean peoples. They're all gross. And they're going to infect us with their grossness for all the impure acts that they do. Because we were gone 50 years, right? And now, we were gone for those 50 years. Now it's unclean again with all these different ites that are there that aren't Israelites, and they're causing us agita. And so here, let's see, what do they say, Leah? One more. Now then,
do not give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or let their daughters marry your sons. Do nothing for their well-being or advantage. Then you will be strong and enjoy the bounty of the land and bequeath it to your children forever.
So that was the earlier injunction, right? That was the earlier, before the Israelites even entered the land. I'm talking about, this is now the time of Moses, basically, that Ezra is falsely quoting, because it's not really, doesn't say that exact thing, but the idea being here, like, mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys. So this is like, like, mama, don't let your babies grow up to marry Jebusites or Hittites, right? So don't do it. It's not good. You have to have more of that cohesive in-group thinking, right? Don't give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or let their daughters marry your sons, whatever it is, because it's going to cause an issue. Meaning what? Avodah zarah, usually, right? Meaning idol worship, right? Avodah zarah, idol worship, that is seen as the biggest problem, because when you have an it feels what's called interfaith from 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. But when you have, again, that mingling, right, in Ezra's mind of the Israelite and the Moabite, or the Jebusite, or the Hittite, or whatever it is, it's going to cause worship of God to decrease. It's going to cause less of a commitment to God on high, and more of a commitment, perhaps, to idol worship. You go to again, you worship God on Friday at the temple, offering sacrifices, and then on Saturday you're giving offerings to Baal, or giving offerings to an Asherah, giving offerings to other kind. What's another one I can't think of? But plenty more of these gods that are not not the God of Israel. And it's a problem. And maybe it's lip service, but if it's lip service to both, it's not good either, right? So it's just the idea that the worship of God is going to decrease once we have these comminglings in families. Okay, Linda White, you want to pick up here after all?
Sure. After all that has happened to us because of our evil deeds and our deep guilt, though you, our God, have been forbearing, punishing us less than our iniquity deserves, in that you have granted us such a remnant as this. Shall we once again violate your commandments by intermarrying with these people who follow such abhorrent practices? Will you not rage against us till we are destroyed without remnant or survivor?
Yeah, exactly. And so now, like, it's that whole, have we learned our lesson kind of thing, right? Have we learned our lesson? And no, apparently not. We have not learned our lesson. That this was a problem before, and now we're doing it again. It's going to be a problem again. We have violated commandments by, again, more than intermarriage. Now, I want to be perfectly clear. Ezra and or the person who is writing the book of Ezra, right, has a clear political, religious agenda, because this is actually not factual when it comes to the Torah text itself. The Torah does not prohibit, in fact, it actually explicitly states that there are some groups of these ites, so to speak, that we can marry, and some that we can't, right? There are certain ones that are seen as verboten. They're not allowed into the mix ever. And there are others who are frankly allowed in the mix, and then you can marry and they can convert, or they can whatever it is. Ezra is being much more unequivocal and making sort of a blanket statement about the danger of intermarriage writ large. That it is a problem. When the Israelites going to marry all these other people that aren't Israelites, right? And that this is a commandment issue where it is an over exaggeration, perhaps, of what we find in the Torah itself. The Torah doesn't always love it, so to speak, but the Torah also recognizes, again, that there are different people in the community, right? And it's not going to be Israelites only. That there are people you can sort of bring into your tent. They don't want there to be idol worship, don't get me wrong, but I think it has a clearer view in the Torah that there are people you can bring into the tent, so to speak, and if they worship God like you worship God, it's fine. And we're going to get to that point towards the end of our discussion here in terms of a comparison. But let's get there. Let's finish off this this passage here. Linda, you want to give me this one more? O eternal.
O eternal God of Israel, you are benevolent, for we have survived as a remnant, as is now the case. We stand before you in all our guilt, for we cannot face you on this account.
Okay, yeah, so again, Ezra very dramatic, and very upset. Okay, so chapter 10 over here. While Ezra was praying, Gary, you want to pick that up there?
Okay. While Ezra was praying and making confession, weeping and prostrating himself before the house of God, a very great crowd of Israelites gathered about him, men, women, and children. The people were weeping bitterly. Then Shechaniah, son of Jehiel of the family of Elam, spoke up and said to Ezra, "We have trespassed against our God by bringing into our homes foreign women from the peoples of the land, but there is still hope for Israel despite this. Now then, let us make a covenant with our God to expel all these women and those who have been born to them, in accordance with the bidding of the Eternal and of all who are connected over the commandment of our God. And let the teaching be obeyed. Take action, for the responsibility is yours, and we are with you. Act with resolve."
Okay, so what's Ezra's solution here, and the priest's
Throw them out.
Throw them out. I think someone
Yeah,
said.
throw them out. Yeah.
That's what I heard. Yeah, no fuss, no muss, no get, no divorce. Give them the old boot. Hit the road, and don't you come back, right? So that's the idea here. That's going to be his viewpoint of how we're going to fix this problem. That there's going to be a recognition of guilt, and this comes from the priest, to Ezra. So let's figure this out. What are we going to do? We are worried, right? We are scared to death of making God angry again by doing the wrong thing. We just got back again, barely unpacked. We just got back here. But now we have all these foreign women, foreign influence from the ones who stayed more often than not, or the ones who were still in Judah, the ones who were still there, who didn't make the schlep to Babylon. Now let's throw them all out and take action. It's time to sort of do this. Okay, so what happens here? Gary, a little more.
Okay. So Ezra at once put the officers of the priests and the Levites and all Israel under oath to act accordingly, and they took the oath. Then Ezra rose from his place in front of the house of God and went into the chamber of Jehohanan, son of Eliashib. There he ate no bread and drank no water, for he was in mourning over the trespass of those who had returned from exile.
Okay, so here we go, right? So they took the oath, they're going to go do it. He's still fasting, or he's still sort of in mourning about it, but a plan is in place. Here we go. Sorry, one more, Gary. Then a proclamation.
Okay. Then a proclamation was issued in Judah and Jerusalem that all who had returned from the exile should assemble in Jerusalem, and that anyone who did not come in 3 days would, by decision of the officers and the elders, have his property confiscated and himself excluded from the congregation of the returning exiles.
Okay.
So to
Bringing
show up
everyone
or else.
together? Hmm?
Wow.
Yeah. What'd you say, Gary?
I said it was show up or else.
Show up or else. It's a mandatory meeting. Okay, you know, if you're not here on Sunday, don't bother coming in on Monday. You know, you got to get in to the office. It's time for a powwow. And if you're not there, you're going to have your stuff taken from you and you are given the big old boot. You yourself are going to be excluded from the congregation. And so then all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled in Jerusalem in 3 days, the 9th month, the 20th of the month, so we have a day for it, right? And they're all sitting at the square of the house of God, trembling on account of the event. And then Ezra says, you know, Ezra gets up in front of the room, right? He has his pointy finger. You have trespassed by bringing home all these foreign women, aggravating the guilt of Israel. So now confess to your God, and then do God's will. Separate yourselves from these people of the land and from the foreign women. So Ezra, remember, Ezra has the yichus. Ezra has that connection from God. Ezra is the scribe. Ezra is the teacher of Torah. Ezra is the one who has the letters from the Persian king. Ezra is the voice, right, of moral and religious authority at this point. He has taken on that role. So he says these foreign women got to go. They got to get out of here, right? And then the congregation responds in a loud voice. We must surely do as you say. But, you know, there are a lot of people involved here. And it's the rainy season. And we don't want to be outside all this time. It's not possible to remain out in the open, nor is this the work of a day or two, because we have transgressed extensively in this matter. So there's an issue here, right? Easy to separate yourself from these women, but there's a lot of people. It affects a lot of families. Arrangements have to be made. You don't want to throw people out in the rain. That's not nice. You know, it's gross. You know, you want to be inside. You should give them a little time to say their last goodbyes here, to create a better circumstance, not just say, you know, hi honey, I'm home, pack your bags. You know, I hope all your stuff is packed up. So don't let the door hit you on the way out. Yeah.
Before they had mentioned, well, they talked about the women and the children, but here they don't talk about the children. So only the women are being booted out.
No, I think the kids are too. We just have to get there another paragraph or two, but yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned it a paragraph back that the children were to go too.
Yeah, a while ago. It just wasn't here.
Yeah, he hasn't been here in a second or two because we're talking more about the women themselves. But I think that's underlying the many people are involved. People have created lives for themselves, right? They've created lives for themselves, and now they're being told it's wrong. You know, it's bad. And there's a disconnect between, I think what you're seeing here, there's a disconnect between the returnees who are coming home from Babylon, right, from Persia, so to speak, after 50 years. And they have a more, for lack of a better word, orthodox conception of what Israelite life should look like. And they're coming back and they're seeing some of their compatriots who are back in the land. Maybe they got there a little early. Maybe they never left. Maybe they were there from 50 years ago, because not everyone left for Babylon. The Babylonians left some people there. And so they're there. And maybe they built lives. And they've married other women, you know, who are not Israelites, and have children by them. And so what are you going to do? You're going to destroy an entire household, with doing this. Because what they're saying is, if we don't do this, God's going to get us all. We're all going to be exiled again. We're going to be kicked out of our land. So it sounds harsh. Don't get me wrong. You know, this sounds harsh, and it's very sort of strict and very stern, to say the least. One could even say, frankly, it's cruel. And I think that'd be accurate enough as well. But they're saying, well, this has to be done for the greater good, you know, for the fact that we as Israelites have to be here and can't risk making God angry again, and us all being in exile, all being destroyed all over again for the sake of some Moabite and Ammonite and Jebusite wives. That they have to go in order for Israel to move forward, which is a harsh and rough lesson, or concept, I think, for them. But the people seem to agree. And then they're negotiating this a little bit. Let our officers remain on behalf of the entire congregation, and all of our townspeople who have brought home foreign women shall appear before them at scheduled times. And then, let's have basically they're saying, let's have a system. Let's have a process in place. We can't just say, hey, everyone get out. We have to have some kind of staggered system here. And if God sees progress, that's fine, right? If God sees progress, then that should satisfy God and not build his anger on their account, that God sees they're taking the correct steps. And so, again, we have to appoint some people to get this thing done. Only Jonathan, the son of Ashael, and blah, 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 whatever, assisted by all these other people. And then they basically, they did a little research. I love this. They sequestered themselves on the first day of the 10th month to study the matter. They needed a little bit more R&D on this plan. Again, kick them out is one thing, but how is this actually going to work? And so it took them a little while, right? So we were the 20th day of the 9th month. Now we're on the first day of the 10th month. And by the first day of the first month now, they had sort of gotten through the process. It had taken a couple months to get done. And it even says here, like even the priestly families, right, were involved. They brought home foreign women, and they named them. They named them and shamed them, I guess, in Ezra, right? This Jeshua had a foreign wife, his brothers, and they gave the word to expel their wives and acknowledge their guilt, and offered a ram from a flock to expiate it. So they said they're sorry, and they had the sacrifice. And again, all these folks, they're sort of listing all the naughty people that did all this stuff, which is not very nice, but blah, 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 blah. You can see there's a lot of people who were in trouble on this.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And this is actually how the book ends. All of these had married foreign women, among whom were some women who had born children. There's not much of a nechemta on it. That's the sort of the end. Let me tell you where all these people screwed up. And then,
some women marry, did some women there marry foreign men?
I'm guessing, that happened.
Were they empowered to do that?
Debatable. I would say. You mean for the
And then
Israelite...
would the kids that they bore be Jewish?
So now we're getting into the good stuff, okay? Because that's a great question, right? Because when we look at this, I think it brings to mind for us a lot of the debates that we have today regarding who is a Jew, who is an Israelite, right? Because we have to remember, in biblical times, there's no such thing as matrilineal descent. That becomes a concept that is much, much later. That's I think medieval, actually. It might be a little earlier, but it's a later concept. It's not biblical. This idea that your mother is a Jew, so you're a Jew. Like that's not a thing that we have biblically. It comes later, and for the reason being that in biblical, rabbinic times, medieval times, heck, even today, I guess, if you don't have a DNA test, you don't always know who the dad is. You know who the mom is, right? As if the mom is Jewish and the mom's giving birth to the baby, you know who that baby's mother is. Dad could be anyone, right? The dad could have been a one-night thing, and now the dad's a starboard, the dad's gone, but you know who the mom is, and that's where the matrilineal descent, the mom passes down, the religion, so to speak, as if we can do that anyway. Right, as if that's a thing that is real in a way, right? That religion can be passed down through birth.
The Karaites do patrilineal
The Karaites do patrilineal, and the
Yeah.
Reform movement does patrilineal descent. The Reform movement made the decision a while ago and said that if your dad's Jewish and mom's not Jewish, you're still Jewish, right? You have one Jewish parent, and that makes you Jewish, right? And for Ezra, the idea is that we can't have it. We can't have all this intermarriage. It's going to dilute Judaism. And Ezra's view becomes, for a very long time, and perhaps even still today, depending on who you ask, a dominant view of what it means to live a Jewish life and what it means to have a Jewish identity. That in marriage is, of course, seen as the gold standard, for the Jewish experience for a lot of people, and intermarriage is seen as something that is, scary and not desired, because that weakens perhaps the Jewish future, right? When you have intermarriage. And so Ezra's viewpoint, not that we're expelling, non-Jewish spouses, but Ezra's viewpoint is that it's really important to marry in your group, because that's how you sustain Jewish tradition and Jewish life. You let other people into the tent that aren't Jewish, and you have intermarriage, you're going to weaken Jewish life, and you're going to, it's what's it called? It's a threat to Jewish continuity. That's what Ezra is saying. And again, I think it's fair to say that for Jewish life for a long time, his view becomes sort of dominant in the Jewish experience. We see it certainly in other movements that are not the Reform movement, but an understanding of that the goal, so to speak, the hope is that Jewish kids marry Jewish kids, and then raise more Jewish families. And then if you have an interfaith family, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe the kid's Jewish, maybe the kid's brought up both, maybe not brought up Jewish at all. And then what happens to that generation, the next generation, et cetera, right? And so that's the fear that Ezra is speaking to, that I think people latched on Jewishly, in many Jewish communities, I'm saying. But if we remember from a few short weeks ago, maybe a little more by now, time is going quick, right? We read another book that had a different perspective on this, perhaps. And that's Ruth, exactly right.
That's right.
Where Ruth is a Moabite. And Ruth, ostensibly, depending on how you want to read it, Ruth converts, so to speak. Ruth becomes part of the Israelite community. And we know from reading the book, Ruth becomes the great-great-grandmother, whatever the generations are, I don't even remember, but she is the forebearer of King David, right? Of the Davidic monarchy, of the dynasty, of the messianic line, comes from an intermarriage, comes from a Moabite relationship, right? And so as Ezra is condemning intermarriage, the book of Ruth is saying, maybe it's not so bad, right? And so the Bible doesn't speak with one voice on this issue, which I think is fascinating, right? Ezra is a very, again, I don't mean Orthodox as in Orthodox Jews, but it has a very straightforward, strict interpretation of what of what Israelites, or who Israelites should marry, and what it means for Jewish continuity to move forward. What do we need, right? And that's good. That's for him that works. And I think for other parts of the Bible it works less. I think there's greater vacillation in other books, with Ruth being the obvious, the biggest book that talks about it. But I think one can find other instances in other works of the Bible where intermarriage is not seen to be the worst thing in the world. Heck, even Esther intermarries, right? Esther marries Ahasuerus, and Esther's a heroine. Esther saves her people, right? Esther intermarries, and she's in a position of great power and authority. And so I think it's just the question. The Bible doesn't speak with one voice on intermarriage and what it means. But in the time of Ezra, he is certainly very clear that he thinks that this is terrifying and it's going to kill the Jewish people.
Think about that, how it's rolled up to, it's got the ideal of purity of race.
Yeah.
and how it, you know, slapped us in the face,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if you
Interesting.
put that part aside, look at all the diseases we have from intermarriage. I mean, it isn't
I'm in marriage.
healthy what
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, genetic diversity, you know, it seems to
Yes.
be a strength, right? And so it really is. It's a very challenging thing for a text like this in particular, which is really a little bit beyond us, I think, in terms of its verbiage. Though again, we have to remember context. You know, we have to remember the idea that here he's thinking about the literal survival of the people because doesn't want God getting angry and God coming down and killing everybody, another exile. So he's being hyper literal, where today it's a little bit more metaphorical in a way, or you know, we don't think God's going to come down and strike us with a plague for too much intermarriage, but intermarriage is seen as the plague we bring upon ourselves, you know, so to speak. And again, most of you know this story, I think, already, but you know, like my parents were intermarried, right? You know, my father was Jewish. My father is Jewish. My mother, you know, was Catholic, and my mother converted eventually. But when they were married, it was an interfaith marriage, you know, and you got a rabbi out of it, for better or worse, right? You know, and so I'd like to think I'm helping the Jewish people continue in my own small way, but you know, we don't know what it brings. And I think that's the Ruth argument, right? Amongst other places.
You could have went farther back than that even. Moses was intermarried.
Yeah, I mean, Moses marries a Midianite, right?
And
Yeah,
she was
exactly
a
right.
black woman.
And then a black woman afterwards as well, right? So Moses, you know, has a couple spouses, and none were Israelites, so to speak. So exactly right. So there are historical antecedents for this, and so that's something Ezra's viewpoint becomes, in a way, a normative viewpoint for some Jewish people, whereas the other points that you've expressed in Ruth and Esther, even as Gary, it's a great point that you said, it's some of the Torah text itself does not lend itself to such extremism. But Ezra is an extremist. And so I think it just becomes a question of how do we balance these narratives, right? And what is it? How do we understand? I'm just going to close this. How do we understand Jewish identity and where it comes from? Because the Bible does not speak with one voice on it. There's a multiplicity of voices when it comes to this particular issue.
Maybe he can't risk. Maybe he is so set because he has too much responsibility to be unorthodox in any way.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, Ezra sees this as literally existential. You know, like that's where he comes from. So I don't want to be too hard on Ezra because he believes that whatever decisions he makes, like it's going to be either for the good or for the downfall of the Jewish people, of the Israelites. So he's seeing it really as we have to do this, even if it sounds cruel, it sounds harsh, whatever it is, but we need to do this because we're doing the wrong thing. And if we do the wrong thing, God's going to come down and punish us, and we can't go through it again. We went through it once. That was enough. It turns out we will go through it again in a few hundred years, but the idea being that, like, we don't want to deal with this problem. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot. Let's make sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. We've washed behind our ears. We don't want to give God an excuse to come down and give us some of this. You know, that's not what you want. So he sees this issue and go, oh my God, seriously, guys? Like, we're going to now, as soon as we're back, the first thing we're going to do is have interfaith marriage and have idol worship and have all this stuff. God's going to be mad when Dad gets home. You know, it's not going to be great. You know, so let's clean this up now. Let's clean up this mess before, you know, God notices that we've done screwed up. And this way we can hopefully avoid the same catastrophe. I just think the question then becomes, again, in that modern context of what that means. And I think that certainly in the liberal movements, I mean, really, we're talking about the Reform and Reconstructionist movements more than anything else, have come to a different place with intermarriage than the Orthodox certainly have, in viewing it as saying, look, we don't live in an only Jewish world, that we're going to meet people like, not to get too much into family history, but I mean, let's give the example. Like my father, I'm sure 100% never envisioned growing up that he would fall in love with a Puerto Rican Catholic, in New York, right? I don't think that ever even occurred to him that would be what happened, but it did. That's how it goes. If you're living in the shtetl somewhere and all you're meeting is Rivka and Shlomit and whatever it is, that's a different society. But if you're in New York City, if you're in the United States, you're meeting different folks. Good, and so that's a wonderful thing. And so the question for us, I'm saying as liberal Jews, is not the boogeyman of interfaith marriage and how do we avoid it. It's how do we grow and how do we adapt, because this is a reality, right? And that what's important is that Jews are cherishing their Judaism. And if their spouses happen to not be Jewish, we find a way, right? We're inclusive. We create community. We are welcoming. We find a way to welcome and honor their partner's experience as well. Do we want kids to be raised in a Jewish home? Sure. But I think we recognize that having a non-Jewish spouse does not mean that it will be a non-Jewish home per se. It's about Jews valuing and cherishing their Judaism enough to pass it on to the next person. Who they love, who they meet, that might not be in our control. Thank God, maybe, for that, right?
Yeah.
That we get to meet and experience different people, and ain't love grand, And sometimes you get a rabbi out of it, and maybe sometimes you don't.
I have
Roll
a
the
friend.
dice.
I have a friend whose daughter married out of the faith, and she was very concerned about it. And I said, all you can do is you have set the example, and if she goes off off the derrick, that it's there and she knows it, and maybe she'll decide to come back. And that's exactly what she did. She came back. She brought her husband, but she did, she kind of lost sight for a bit, but she did come back. And that's the thing is, people, you show them the way. That doesn't mean they're going to walk the path.
No.
But you hope that if they step off, that they'll step back on at some point. It'll become important to them. And I think particularly sometimes as people get older, something sometimes happens, and suddenly it occurs to you that this is something that you do in your life.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, I love that idea of like the twists and turns, right? Because we don't know, what's going to happen in the future. I think that's the greater point. But if you're inclusive, if you're understanding, if you're welcoming, if you're not wagging the finger and whatever it is, there's a better chance that family is going to be involved later in some way, right? They're going to have good memories of the rabbi, of the synagogue, of whatever it is, being welcoming and being inclusive. Now, again, the tent only stretches so far sometimes, and that's okay too. But the reality is that if you find ways to yes, you create a better chance than if you find ways to say no. And so it's just a question of, again, how big the tent's going to be, and then how inclusive you want to be. Where is the stop? Where is the no eventually? And for every rabbi, for every community, for every family, it's different. And then that's, again, part of the Reform experience in particular, is that there really is no, we try our best, right, to be inclusive. Do we always succeed? You can't say yes to everything, but we try. No one solved it, I'm trying to say. But I think that there are arguments to be made, obviously, to try to emphasize. I don't think it's bad to say that, it's wonderful when Jews marry Jews, but it's also not necessarily. I think when we act that it's the end of the world when a Jewish person marries someone who's not Jewish, I think that does not help us. I think that is very counterproductive.
I agree.
That speaks to even in Reform, people who marry a non-Jew is always considered a convert. That person, if they converted, they're always considered a convert, as opposed to, converts many times are more observant than somebody who was born Jewish.
It's actually seen as a very significant transgression, actually, to treat a convert any differently than you would someone who was born into it. Like rabbinic Judaism is very harsh, actually, on that idea of if someone converts to Judaism, you are never allowed to say to that person, "Oh, what do you know? You were born Christian." Or whatever it is. Like that is seen as a tremendous no-no, in the Talmud, even and back then.
And how often does that actually happen?
Oh my goodness.
It happened to me.
Yeah, it definitely happens.
Mm-hmm.
It was, kind of told to me, well, you're a convert. And it's sort of like they were saying, you're less than.
Less than. 100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it happens. It happens to converts. It happens to Jews of color all the time.
Oh.
Because there's a question of, are you a real Jew? And what does that mean, right? Because it's the assumption is that unless you had family born in Poland, or Hungary, or Russia, you're not a real Jew, somehow. So converts, Jews of color. I mean, there are people who get this a lot, and they're made to feel less than, and it causes schisms in the community when those kind of things happen. So it's just something too that, I've seen it with my own eyes, unfortunately, too many times I can count, of people who are just made to feel they aren't Jewish enough, so to speak, or they aren't real Jews, and yikes. Yikes.
I always think that when somebody converts, that they work harder at being a Jew than someone that was born into it. They've taken the time to learn what it is.
Yeah, well, I think that's what Leah was saying too. Is this idea that like sometimes these converts, oftentimes people have converted to Judaism because they had to want it, or they had to grab it.
Right.
But I attribute this to some of you might remember last year, it feels like forever ago, we brought in Joe Buchanan virtually to sing for us for a Friday night. Joe is someone who converted to Judaism. He's a Texas Jew.
From Texas,
Right.
I remember that.
Had his boots on and his cowboy hat, and that whole thing.
Yeah.
And he's a fascinating guy. He's a friend of mine. It's a fascinating story. But one of the things he always says, it's actually one of his songs that you find on YouTube, is that you can choose to be chosen. And that all of us, in a way, whether we were born Jewish or whether we converted to Judaism, frankly, every single day we make a choice, right? We make a choice to be Jewish, because there's no one with a gun to our head saying that you have to do this. Tomorrow, if we want to, we can do whatever we want. We could, we can go get baptized if we wanted to. We could convert to different faiths just like this. You can do that. So all of us make the choice every day to remain, committed, passionate, engaged Jewish people, right?
We're all Jews by choice.
We're all Jews by choice, right? Exactly right.
Interesting.
We're all Jews by choice, in our own way. Whether you're 8th generation from, whatever it is, or whether you converted yesterday, like we're all Jews by choice. And that, I think it's a nice teaching that I attribute to him. I'm sure others have said it too, but it's certainly a nice teaching that I ascribe to my buddy Joe.